we read a lot about the Amazon and the trees, and they make oxygen. 70% of our oxygen comes from waterways. And we're dumping sewage in what is essentially our lungs. It drives me crazy every time I think about it. Or let's just dump anything in there. These are our lungs. The other thing that the water does for us is scrub the CO2. And I'm doing this for Barbara. We'll get there. So, degradation of any kind of organic material requires oxygen. So anything that's dead and being decomposed is going to use oxygen because the bacteria need it. It also throws off carbon dioxide. So that's the basic relationship between the two. But you have to think in terms of the Earth. The Earth is enclosed. It's like it's got a big, a big seal around it. And the amount of carbon and the amount of oxygen don't change at all. The amount of carbon that's here is the amount of carbon that's always been here. What happens is we move them to a new location, and that location is wrong. And that's what's wrong, that's what's wrong when we pollute the waters. One of the things that we measure is dissolved oxygen, and it's probably the best indicator we have of water purity, because the amount of oxygen in the water tells you that everything is either healthy or not healthy. Or a decomposition has just used up all the oxygen. And obviously that's going to happen in the presence of garbage, which is loaded with bacteria. So an example of all this is the algal blooms that we see out here sometime. They're red and they're ugly and they're nasty. They react and start growing and dividing in response to phosphates and nitrates and a lot of things that are in our fertilizer that we put in the lawns or they use in farms. And they get crazy. I mean, they love this stuff. They start dividing like all over the place. They divide so fast that they give out nutrients. And when they give out nutrients, they stop to die. And when they start to die, remember the basic thing, if they're dying and decomposing, they are using oxygen to do that, and the water becomes oxygen depleted as a result of the algae. The other thing is that there's so much of them, the spreads that you see out there, that they prevent the photosynthetic activity from happening. So,
is the red tide related to that?
The red tide is an algal bloom.
It is now.
So, why does carbon dioxide matter? Well, it's a greenhouse gas. So, what greenhouse gases do is actually not such a bad thing. What they do is they absorb heat, and absorbing the heat, they hold on to it. That is like, it's been compared to a brick in a fireplace where it gets really hot and it releases the heat very slowly. And if carbon dioxide didn't do this, as a greenhouse, as a greenhouse, I can't even get out, gas, then we would be really cold. The Earth would be about 0 degrees. So CO2 is good stuff out there. And if you get too much, you absorb too much heat, and that's global warming. And that's what we're dealing with now. The other reason to think about CO2 in the water is that right at the surface where you see the water here, you have CO2, and if you have a lot of it, you get carbonic acid formed. And so you get acidification of your water, which shouldn't be very good for fish and any other thing that happens to be growing in there.
Can you see that, the acidification, as you call it? Can you see that, or is it just happening and you can't see it?
You can't see it happening. And if you'll notice when you measure out there, you're measuring pH every time.
So, and that's your indication?
Of acid.
Oh, right.
Right, with the little probe, one of them, and that's because almost everything, every other measurement will be based on pH, the temperature, and those are the primary things. So, what is carbon sequestration, which is what actually is a good thing that the water does? And it goes back to bacteria making oxygen and CO2 being a product of the decomposition. So if you have decomposition on land, let's say an animal dies and bacteria get in there and chomp, 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 I got you. Chew it up, it requires oxygen, but there's oxygen on the land, that's not a problem. It's in the water, when you get way down, particularly if you're in deep water. There's very, very little oxygen down there. And it's very little oxygen because there's no photosynthesis of any kind. The phytoplankton aren't really making oxygen. And without oxygen, you're not going to get degradation of anything. So the carbon is essentially sequestered down in the bottom, and that is for centuries. It can sit there, not go anywhere. It also happens in wetland areas and areas where the oxygen is rather low. But if you went into some of these areas where the oxygen the carbon has just been stored for centuries, and you start to build a bridge or make a house or do something that disturbs the water, the carbon's released. And you can release centuries worth of carbon in a decade or so. So I think we have to be really careful about our wetlands and really careful about our water, and know that our oxygen, our lungs, are actually out here. And CO2 is also a product, but it's important. That's our take home so far.
Adjie, have you ever heard, one of the things I think is most fascinating about the gas that's trapped at the bottom of the ocean?
Right.
And this is just a hypothesis, it's not proven yet, but there's a theory, you've all heard of the Bermuda Triangle and how ships just disappear there and they never see a trace of them. I've heard a theory that sometimes a gas bubble will form way down at the bottom, and then other gas molecules start coming over. So essentially, it's this ginormous bubble of gas rises up right below a ship, just by coincidence.
Wow.
And the ship then instantly, it's like all of a sudden it's in air. It instantly drops below the surface, never to be seen again.
That's
Isn't that
amazing.
fascinating?
Yeah.
Wild.
It's amazing what goes on down
Yeah, yeah.
You know, there are a million or so species out there, and most of them haven't been identified yet.
Yeah.
They're way down at the bottom. So, plastics. Everybody knows there's plastics everywhere. I mean, I can read the factoids here. There's some problems with plastics, and that is they come in all different sizes. The big ones, like whole playgrounds that are dumped out here, and I swear I pulled motors out, I pulled tractor tires, you name it, right out of the hutch up here. Just disgusting, really, the stuff they throw in there. Anyway,
Tires, sinks.
you're
One
right.
time we brought a sink in.
It's true. It's a mess.
I mean, that's intentional. I mean, to throw it.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
it
yeah.
doesn't
from
just
the
happen to end up
factories
there.
or
It's
whoever goes and dumps
unbelievable.
this stuff.
Yeah.
And there
The
were a
nice
lot
thing
of
is that
mechanics
oysters
up
can
there.
attach to them and grow
I'm
on
not
them.
surprised.
So that's Paul Mankiewicz has left a whole bunch of stuff out here to attract oysters. All that metal stuff out there.
slow
Very slow.
decomposition.
Yeah.
Anyway, so there's a lot of it. The problem with these plastics are all different sizes, from huge down to you have to use a microscope, or smaller than that, an EM maybe. Those are called nanoplastics. Microplastics are a little larger. They're about the size of a sesame seed. Sesame seed, and this sesame seed we'll come right back to. Anyway, it's all caused by banging this plastic against the rocks, and also degradation from UV light, which happens. The other thing you should know about these plastics out there in the water is that they can leach the substances that they were made with, and those substances are invariably cancer causing. So they leach those, and not only do they leach these compounds, they bind it. They bind all the other kind of trash that's out there, like pesticides and, I don't know, hormones, and you name it. They bind them. And that's because there's just this huge expanse of plastics that form a matrix. And with this matrix, you have all kind of binding of really lousy stuff. Here's our factoids. I have to use this special computer for that. We use 1 million plastic bottles per minute.
We who, America or the
It's the
world?
world.
The world.
It's estimated there are 5 trillion pieces of plastic floating in our oceans, and I believe half of it's in the hutch. It can take over 400 years for plastic bottles to biodegrade on their own. But something like only 9% actually gets recycled. And recycled is another problem, because once you recycle it, a lot of different compounds form, and those compounds in the second and third generation may be entirely impossible to get rid of. So is recycling a good idea? Nobody knows really.
What about my bracelets? These are
Yeah.
that's a good idea, but it's not getting rid of a lot of plastic.
This is,
The Ocean's Forward, I
yeah,
love those people.
tell
They're
everyone.
making a mission, there's a mission connected
Yeah.
to those, that's the important part of
This is an organization that takes plastic out of the oceans, and for $20 you get a recycled bracelet to support them.
Oh, that's good.
it. And it helps them, it helps pay for
Takes the junk out.
Well, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch is 1.6 million square kilometers. That's a lot of bracelets. Believe me, it's an area twice the size of Texas, floating around the Pacific. So this is a bigger problem than a bracelet. But I
There-
think those people are great, I have to say.
Every
Wonderful.
Make
people.
little
people
bit
aware.
helps.
Yeah,
Exactly.
And the more we know about it helps.
yeah, that's, so, based on a number of studies, even those by EPA, have actually confirmed that these particles are not really good. And not only do they carry all kind of bad things, we ingest them. We ingest a lot of them. I think somebody calculated, I don't know how they calculate this, but we eat about a credit card's worth per week
Ugh.
of microplastics or nanoplastics that we can't see. And again, the bad part is, I mean, maybe the plastics, other than being an irritant in our intestines, could pass right through us, but it's the crap they carry with them
Well,
that's
and
horrible.
the nanoparticles are the worst ones because
Right.
they're just the perfect size that your cell thinks it's a food particle and will actively pull it into the cell and adjust it. It'll phagocytose it. Like a micro one is usually big enough that your cell knows it's foreign and the tissue may respond to it, but it's not going to ingest it. The nano-sized particles, the body actually, the cell will internalize it and sometimes even import it all the way into the DNA. It will cause
Ooh.
mutations or cross-linking. And some of them are, like you mentioned, the chemicals that leach out of the plastics or that bind to the plastics. A lot of times are hormone mimicking chemicals. You know, I personally wonder if a lot of what we're seeing in our society today with kids who aren't sure what gender they are, if some of that isn't tied to the fact that they've been drinking out of plastic bottles their whole life. So they've actually been consuming a lot of chemicals that mimic estrogen.
Wow.
You know.
Indeed, they mimic estrogen, and actually, I was about to get there.
Did I steal your thunder?
The
I'm
problem
sorry.
with hormones.
You can repeat it, that's good.
Yeah.
Right.
The problem with hormones is that they're small amounts do things. They are active when they're in almost minute amounts. And every woman, or even men, who are on hormones, birth control pills, for example, every urine sample they make goes into the toilet, will go back out into the water. So we're feeding all of our fish and all of our organisms hormones. And we don't know what that's doing because EPA does not follow plastics. In fact, they refuse, so far I think they have refused to be responsible. Let's talk about one of the dangers, the BPA. Help me with this one.
Bisphenol A.
This is a hazardous chemical. It disrupts our hormones. It's very lousy. You'll remember it was in the newspaper as being contaminant baby bottles, so that when you boil the baby bottle, the BHA came out, and it was really dangerous. So the corporations were asked to stop doing it this way, to get rid of BPA immediately. And they all swore they did. It's not listed on any bottles anywhere, but they refused to say what replaced it. We have no idea.
BPB replaced it, which is almost the same thing.
It's the same thing.
Yeah.
Jeez.
But they can advertise it as BPA free,
Right.
which it is.
Oh, wow.
But they replaced it with BPAB, which is just as bad.
Wow.
So that it's pretty typical of the whole plastic patch. That it's just I'll get to a few examples, but
Are we going to talk about how this relates to cancer? The epidemic of cancer in our society?
I don't think that there's been a full study of what plastics do relative to epidemics of cancer. Certainly BPA, there's a lot of data. There's a lot of data on similar compounds. But he was right. They can actually damage your DNA.
Which can then lead to cancer.
Which can lead to cancer.
Right, anytime you damage. Now, I can speak for about 4 hours on
Oh,
that
on
one, so don't
genetics.
get me started.
She's our genetics expert. Sorry.
Well, that's good. That's good.
The plastic is made out of something called peat or PET, depending on where you live. And it's that very thin plastic you find in water bottles. It's supposedly in everything that anything that's one of those lightweight plastic kind of containers. In reality, it's almost 100% recyclable if we had recycling plants. But we do not have one that I know of. I tried to find it on the internet, and I couldn't find an example of any place where they'd actually tried to recycle the plastic into, for example, making more bottles, which might be a great idea, right? The reason we don't have recycling is because it's cheaper to make new bottles than it is to recycle the old ones.
Probably the bottling companies have the dominant
Well, I mean,
control.
Nestle, PepsiCo, Coca-Cola, I think those are the big ones.
Where are plastics going now, Adjie? When we do recycling,
Yes.
where are they going?
In the water,
Or in China?
yeah.
Outside the United States?
Landfills where they blow into the water.
You mean when we recycle, it doesn't go into anything recycling?
You can, no, less than 9%. The rest just go right into landfills in the water.
Then why are we
So
doing
is it
all this
complete
recycling?
To make
That's a
ourselves
good
feel
question.
It's a complete product?
Well, we don't do a really great job of recycling plastics. We do a better job with aluminum, which there is a nickel, on most of that, and also on the plastics, but not as many. But we have an automatic system for taking care of it. We give a nickel, right? There's no incentive for water bottles that I know of. And you can't make carpets out of them. You can't make.
Bracelets.
You can make bracelets. You can't make carpets. Or I remember my dad gave me a pair of socks made from Pepsi-Cola containers. He was so proud of this. This was his whole life, right? And I still have them. They still don't work very well. It's kind of a sad way to do things. But anyway, the degradation of the plastic material over time is pretty heavy when you try to recycle in any kind of way. So it just doesn't work very well. So we know there's plastic bags. If you're a sea turtle and looking up, your favorite snack is jellyfish.
Mm.
They really love jellyfish for 4 o'clock tea.
Oh,
And
jeez.
reach up and grab a bag. And a lot of sea turtles just have a gut full of bags. They also stop up our sewer system because they kind of bang up and make big piles of plastic.
There's albatross dying of starvation because their crops are all full of plastics. I
Exactly.
mean, they have found cigarette lighters, bottle caps, you name it, in the crop of the baby albatross that are dead from starvation. Because you obviously can't digest it for food.
What do you think is the most picked up piece of garbage near the bay or near the shore?
Plastic bottle,
It's cigarette butts.
Mm.
cigarette
I
butts.
was
Still?
just gonna say cigarettes.
Yeah,
or-
and
or
I
is that-
calculated that
That's
for us.
surprising me in
With
this day and age.
filters. The
With
filters.
Yeah.
the filters.
Yeah.
But still, I mean, so many people have stopped smoking.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Not enough, obviously, to make a difference.
And not everywhere.
I would have guessed that would be true in 1970. I am
Yeah.
surprised it's
Right.
still true.
It's
today.
still true. I calculated
Yeah.
for what we pick up in the hutch, those cigarette bags.
Really?
Wow.
Wow.
Anyway, a lot. Like thousands and thousands. So
Wow.
I think the people who still smoke a lot.
It's
Somebody's
expensive.
keeping them. Somebody's keeping cigarette companies going.
I don't know, it's expensive.
Every time I see someone flip some out of the car window in front of me,
Yeah,
just
right.
I
wanna
know.
grab
I just want to do this, like
Trying to
gotcha.
shake them.
Right?
Yeah. I want to flick it right back at them.
So, how can you get rid of plastic particles? Which is kind of what you're asking. I hope maybe.
Yeah?
Yeah. Well, don't go to your local water treatment plant because as long as nothing's regulated by EPA, they're not even going to worry about it. They can filter out the big particles, but the nanoparticles are a real problem. So filtration, what works? There are only two methods that work in a satisfactory manner, and one is reverse osmosis.
Yes! No, because I've been in an argument with a dear friend of mine for years because I have a reverse osmosis
It's
filter.
attached underneath.
Yes. And he said not necessary, this is someone who's an environmentalist. And I said definitely necessary.
Definitely necessary.
And I
It's particularly the faucet kind are really good things to have. And they aren't perfect, but I don't know if you remember osmosis, but when you have a liquid that's full of stuff and water over here, they tend to seek each other's level so that the bad stuff comes over here and they now at the same level and have the same amount of junk in there. In reverse osmosis, they reverse that process of flow. And they do it with a very serious membrane between the two. So when you have the reverse process, what you wind up with is relatively pure water on one side. So that works really well. What else works? Well,
Carbon? Does activated carbon work? Activated
carbon
charcoal?
coming up. Activated carbon is it's fired with a gas, really hot, so that you get nooks and crannies in there. Right? Don't know any way to talk about it, but
Kind of like charcoal,
yeah,
you know?
it's a charcoal. And when the stuff starts percolating through there, if it's big things that are being filtered, they just kind of come right through. Gravity pulls them through. If it's these little nanoparticles, they kind of go like that all over the place, so that they get caught down in the charcoal. And some faucet filters have them, and there's some pitcher type filters. And I actually checked mine before I left home. I have a Soma, and their new filters are I can't even say this, coconut charcoal, whatever the hell that is. I don't know. I don't know why you use coconut shells, but some are okay, some aren't. So check your filter when you get home.
And the downside to reverse osmosis is it takes energy.
Oh,
So
does
there's-
it?
Yeah.
No,
It does.
why?
Isn't yours hooked up to some sort of electric pump?
No.
Oh yeah,
It
it does.
must be.
It's a pump.
Yeah.
It has
No,
to.
I have
Yeah.
reverse osmosis. It's three things. One of them is charcoal, one is reverse osmosis, and one is, it's not electric at all. It just, it's under my sink.
Then it's not reverse osmosis.
It is. I know it
It
is.
takes a lot of energy to force the water.
You have
back
to have
the
a
membrane.
pump. It takes a lot
Yeah.
of energy.
I
now.
don't think so. You can come look at mine.
I will come look because
Okay.
you should have that when you reverse the osmotic process, you have to have a pump that does that.
Mhm.
Something really serious.
Mhm.
Then they just have a really good filter in there, probably.
It's three filters, and one of them is reverse osmosis.
Not if it's not hooked up to.
It's
pump.
got to be hooked up to something.
It's definitely. You come look at it. It is.
We'll find out at the next meeting.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Look, I was happy to find out my picture has charcoal in it. What?
Oh, my hand is crampy.
Is that any good?
Refrigerators
It is, yeah.
usually have
It's
activated
usually charcoal.
charcoal.
Oh, do they? Oh,
Yeah.
good.
And the best way for us to get clean water is to filter it at the point of consumption. You know, like right in your
Mhm.
faucet or your refrigerator where you're going to drink
Yes.
it. The problem is the fish and the oysters.
Yeah, they don't
can't
get
do
that.
Right.
Oh.
So that's good for us. It's bad for everything else in the world. Not to mention the people that are drinking well water. You know?
Or eating the fish.
Yeah, or eating the fish. Very good point. Yeah.
Anyway, these plastics seem to be part of our life for a long time, unless we can. I feel kind of silly. I keep filling up the filter because you make coffee. You forget how much liquid you take in. It's not just water.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're making coffee,
Soup.
you're making whatever.
Soup.
Soup. My eggs are in water. You know, it's
Everything.
yeah. But I'm being really careful. Once I found out.
So
Anyway.
drink less water? Is that one
No.
of the- No,
No.
doesn't
No.
matter,
Filtered water. Drink filtered water.
that you buy.
Well, I know
No, you
offense.
can attach it to your faucet.
No offense to
Oh, you
anyone
could
here,
make
but
it-
at our
your-
age,
your
drink whatever you
tap
want to
is-
drink. It doesn't really matter. It's younger people that need
It's
to
too
be more
late.
careful.
Right.
Too late for us.
late.
Bye-bye.
Cancer doesn't develop overnight. You know, it takes 20 years to develop. So once you get to a certain point, who cares?
Well, we have grandchildren.
Well, yeah, that's what we need to do it like for the Native
Right.
Americans did it for the later generations, right? We need to
Sure.
do it for the future, not for us right now.
Yeah. Good point.
Okay, sewage.
Well, oh,
this
this is your
fun part.
favorite.
Oh, my
I hope
God.
That's the
my
moment I've been waiting for.
That's what I every time I look at the water, I just go crazy. I cannot even fathom what is going through our minds to dump sewage
Anything.
in the water. Anything but sewage,
Yeah.
loaded with bacteria. Who knows microparticles?
Yeah.
Oh, speaking of microparticles, by the way, it's in a lot. Oh, it used to be. It sort of still is. In a lot of makeup products, lipstick.
Nanoparticles.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Paint.
the
Paint.
facial
Yeah.
stuff,
Foundation.
Wow.
exfoliants,
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
foundation.
exfoliants,
Yeah.
Oh.
facial stuff
All
like
that
foundation,
stuff,
yeah.
exfoliants,
Wow.
scrub.
Yeah.
Makeup
Yeah,
is
scrub
full of
is
nanoparticles.
loaded with these.
Plastics.
And they
these-
were supposedly outlawed in 2015 by the Obama administration, but they're still in there. They're not regulated by anybody, so.
What do you
just-
think
I'm
causes
sorry.
that beautiful shimmery translucence on the
Exactly.
lipstick? It's the little nanoparticles reflecting the light.
And your synthetic clothes that
Right,
you don't
right
have
on your
to
makeup
iron.
that you're licking, you know?
Right.
So,
Oh my God.
I've never worn makeup. I will continue.
yeah.
Yeah.
I don't wear it out of laziness, but you know.
Well, I do. I out of laziness. I have to be honest.
Anyway, be careful with your makeup.
Oh, God. You mean there's no use?
Yeah, what's the point?
Was it Mary Kay or Estee Lauder? that
Here
said
we are.
There's two kinds. There's Mary Kay or Estee Lauder. One of them said there's two kinds of women in the world: beautiful women and lazy women. I'm a lazy woman.
Wow.
But it turned out that you're the healthy women.
No.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay, sewage. S word. Any used water is wastewater. That's a definition. Where does it come from? Well, it comes from all kinds of places. You think of sewage when you flush the toilet.
Mhm.
You don't think of sewage in the streets and in the parking lots and all these impermeable places that we have. I mean, New York is mostly impermeable. If somebody somewhere, I'm starting to sound like Paul. If they don't start putting little gardens in the middle of parking areas or little gardens around to absorb the water, I can't even understand why they don't do that. That's simple. Dig it up, make a little garden. You got it, you know. What is Teddy?
I think it's a delivery
The
truck.
city trying to impose that, like when new buildings go up, a certain part of the block has to be, they have to have a park or green space of some sort.
I know, and they supposedly did that on City Island, but it's blocked off. I don't think they take care of the gardens, but in any case, because there's so much, there's a lot of stormwater that comes through all over the place. It carries salt, oil, grease, car gunk, whatever, is around, dog poops, rubber from our tires. Anybody who's worried about truckers taking those huge trucks over the bridge, one of the worst points of contamination
At
is
the
large
bridge.
trucks going over bridges. And it's the tires and the AC fluid, which is pretty disgusting stuff in it. Speaking of carcinogenic, pretty disgusting stuff on its own. So you have all this stuff that's going in. So factoid time. More than 80% of the world's wastewater flows back into the environment without being treated or reused.
Yay!
The facilities that we currently have treating our water reduce the amount of pollutants. They don't eliminate the amount of pollutants. They're reducing them to a levels where presumably they're not going to cause some kind of horrible diseases like cancer or whatever. And
Are you
that's
talking in New York? Or are you
in
Is that
New
what
United
York is the
States?
worst.
Hunts
Or in the
Point.
United States, or?
That's what they do at Hunts Point. Is
Yeah.
Hunts Point is
if it gets there.
I'm going to get there. Hold on. If it makes it under the water. So our everything's aging. There's pipes in New York City that are 150 years
Mhm.
old. There are also pipes that are really pretty new. I lived on the Hudson in the late 80s, and someone told me to look out the window. There was sewage flowing out to the river, and I said, "No, come on, get serious. Raw sewage this time of, we should have been right in the middle of having everything purified and cleaned. They were still dumping sewage. That's New York City. So we'll get
against the law now.
It was against the law then too. It
I know,
has
then,
been against the
yeah,
law since
since the
1972.
Right.
Well, it was
So-
done unbeknownst to us in our house. Our bungalow was dumping raw sewage into the Eastchester Bay, and we did not know it until we had been there for a few years, and we had a big picnic with a lot of people really using our toilets in the bungalow in our guest house. And my neighbor said, "Sarah, there's toilet paper on the beach in front of your house. I
Wow.
think you're leaching sewage." And I went out and I'm like, "Oh my God, you're right." I mean, we had no idea.
There were hundreds of them all
Hundreds
around
of
the
bungalows
island
just
when we moved
dumping.
here.
Well, there's in the
Yeah.
basement of our house. There's what used to be a toilet and a shower, and we of course have nothing there now. But as a test, we poured water down it. It comes right out into the bay.
Wow.
And 33 tier, that entire complex, all the water went everything went out into the bay.
Went past
Right.
tense. I hope.
Hmm?
Past tense went.
Went.
Okay, good.
Yes, and we had ours repaired immediately.
Good. And when they redid the sewers, when they redid the Schofield Street stuff, about 15, 20 years ago, they found enormous numbers. They were horrified, the guys working here, about sewage going directly out into the Seine.
We're gonna get there.
Okay, sorry.
No, I just, yeah, you're gonna have to help me with that part because it's all out of the current and the Allen, whatever. Anyway, sewage systems. What goes in the water and what goes to Hunts Point? It's really the question here. What goes in the water is any kind of storm water. You've seen it coming down the street, particularly on this side of the island. There are no storm sewers really. There's no real, you don't see pipes out here of any kind. I think I've seen one which is close to Horton, but that's it.
Schofield has one.
Yeah,
What do you mean? Pipes coming down from the street?
from the
Yeah.
streets.
Yeah.
You know,
We have
there's
one on
great,
Pilot Street.
Storms, we have
you know,
one
there's,
on
yeah, I know there's one.
But we
That's
have
the one I'm
something
talking
coming
about.
down Horton Street.
Yeah, we have this.
It's the one on
comes
Pollock.
running down the street and then goes into a drain and it goes right
Yeah.
out into the beach.
But
Uh-huh.
most storm
Right.
sewers go
Yeah.
right into a body of
Right.
water, right?
Yes,
Most
they
storm
do.
sewers
I think
don't
so.
get treated.
Yes, and that's why we had floods. Or I had a flood in my basement. Is because it got overwhelmed
By
from
that
this
big sun,
by
right.
too much rain coming down the street and then also off my roof. So anyhow, but
No, it's dog poop and everything coming right down the street.
And antifreeze and stuff that people use to
Everything.
work on their cars in the sidewalk.
Antifreeze
But I don't
is the
think any
worst.
society or any community treats that, the rainfall runoff. I don't think any place treats that.
No, they don't.
Yeah.
Not really.
Yeah.
It's in fact in New York they give them cute names like it. That's those drains are called MS4s, which is
yeah, right. I could never.
Oh,
What is that?
Right.
sanitary
Starts with an M.
something sewer. It's
MS4.
municipal
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there are
sanitary
several up, especially in the north end of the island.
sewage something
Yeah.
system.
Yeah.
Anyway, they all have
Move
cute
those
names.
sewage.
So you can either have two separate systems, one with all going to the water, the MS4s, or you can have a separate system for sewage and industrial kind of stuff, which is a separate line and presumably goes to the closest treatment plant. Maybe it does and maybe it doesn't, because as I said, some of the pipes are 150 years old. Others do both. They take the storm sewer water and the sewage, they all are put together, they call CSOs, and it all goes to the treatment plant. If it makes it. If it gets to the treatment plant and it's too much water or it's too much rain that week and it can't be collected, they just dump it.
Can you explain that part of it to me?
Well, there's
Adjie? Why?
Yeah.
So explain that process. When there's the huge rainfall, like why you can't
to build a
It's like an
system that
escape
can handle
valve.
it, it's too expensive.
Right. So what we're seeing, we kayak around and we see the holes, CSOs. That's just relief for the system when it gets overwhelmed. Just literally, there's no place for it to go.
Right. Everybody always says there are no CSOs in the city. I don't know. That's
No, there are CSOs, we
course
know
there
that.
From the living shoreline, that huge one.
So wait, what Sally's asking was right. So that means, sorry.
careful.
No, it's, because I never understood that either. This is what gets overwhelmed. That's when it's overwhelmed. The system can't handle it. It's the excess.
It's in the waste treatment plant. You've got a tank that holds everything, right?
Uh-huh.
When that tank gets full, where does it go?
So that's the
It
CSO.
overflows right into the water.
Right, okay,
And there
it's
are
the
two of them
overflow.
up in Co-op City.
But we have them here.
One we have on Eastville.
They're actually four.
And is that the one we see from our living
I got the
No, but
address.
the two are the bad ones.
Yeah.
No,
the
she says 4 around the
233.
island. 4 around the island?
No,
No,
on
no.
Co-op City
Okay, but the one we see from the living shoreline,
is
That's at Co-op at Schofield Street.
okay.
that's the Schofield, that's our personal CS.
Well, it's wait a minute. It's more complicated than that.
Oh,
It's,
okay.
again, we'll get back to that. But the sewage is a pump there. It's on Schofield.
Uh-huh,
And anytime you have a sewage pump,
yeah,
you have to have a CSO because
For
the
the
pump
overflow.
can overflow.
for the
And
overflow.
that's what that CSO
Interesting, I
is.
never knew that.
I never knew why, I just didn't understand why it had to go out. I see, it's just, there's
And
no
also-
room for the
No
sewage
place
treatment.
for it
There's
to
no
go.
place for it to go, because it just gets completely overwhelmed.
Does anybody want to move inside? Are you cold?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah,
Yeah? I mean, don't, got
Okay.
big enough room.
yeah, are we all vaccinated?
Do that?
Vaccinated.
Is everybody vaccinated? Okay.
Vaccinated.
Okay.